generally. So if feel free to change your name or not appear on the screen if you're uncomfortable about that. We do want to have a recording of it so we can share it with those who were not able to be here. In 2016, I had the great gift of being part of a scientific study. I'm an Episcopal priest. I've been ordained about 16 years, and the institution that was doing the study was looking for religious professionals from all the world's religions, and in a setting of ministry, which I was, and I applied for that and was accepted, and had the great gift of having two pretty medium high doses of psilocybin in a clinical setting. And in that setting, I had two very religious experiences, very Christian experiences, one of healing, both the power of healing with touch, which I had done as a clergy person many times with people, and had a very strong energy transfer is what I would say now, and a healing of some pretty serious anxiety that I was carrying around, totally unexpected for me to have that. And then the second experience was a completion and a broadening of my ordination to the priesthood, both in the setting of a safe and legal experience of psilocybin with two very gifted guides. So almost immediately, I knew that my work as a Christian clergy person would be different based on that experience. And I waited for the moment and for the right time for that to happen. And about a year and a half ago, I left full-time parish ministry, or took a break from it to found this organization and this network, to start expanding the conversation much beyond myself and my small circle of friends. And now this circle is growing and growing and growing. And part of that circle has been my friends JT and Naomi. We've been talking for at least a year. They're both clergy. They're both ordained to the United Church of Christ. And we've been talking, and they've gotten some additional training beyond their experience as clergy people, which I'll let them share that individually, let them share that. But they're both gifted clergy people and are growing in their gifts through their training as people that are ready to guide people in experiences of psychedelics, both individually, I think, and then in small group settings. I'm most interested in small group settings, retreats, and as we look toward Oregon and then possibly Colorado and other states, that'll make this legal for at least in Oregon recreational use, so there won't need to be a diagnosis. That will be an opportunity for us as Christians to, I'm hopeful, and I think it'll be very possible to have retreats here in the United States for beginning, I think, with religious professionals, so that we have a good trained cohort of people that have had the experience. And then for those people to then broaden their own circles and practice of ministry to include that with the right training. So we're figuring it out. We're using some of the clinical training to get ourselves more educated so that we're more prepared for this. And each of our guests today have their own experiences of training and how they see this going. And that's the gift of these sorts of gatherings. We'll have monthly forums with different topics. The next one is October 31st, so Wednesday at noon Eastern, and we'll have that link read. I'll get that link in the chat as we're going along. We ask that if you do have questions at the end, to raise the raise hand feature of Zoom as a way to let us know, and we'll do our best to accommodate everyone's questions. We are working on topics around scripture, so we'll have that as a topic. And then ecstatic experiences in the Christian tradition and relationship to indigenous traditions. How do we as Christians learn from and be in a relationship with these longstanding indigenous traditions of psychedelic use? And then looking forward to accountability and ethics, race and equity, psychedelic chaplaincy, mysticism, and our relationship to science. So we're planning these for the next, maybe for a long time, but at least for the next year, a monthly gathering, so that we can do some educating of each other and ourselves, so that we can be ready for this when it comes, as I said. So right now, it's my pleasure to introduce Naomi Schultz. I'll introduce JT in just a moment, but introduce Naomi Schultz. She's a chaplain and a pastor ordained to the United Church of Christ, as I mentioned. She has a postgraduate certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies and research from the California Institute of Integral Studies, and is working toward board certification as a chaplain with the College of Pastoral Supervision and Psychotherapy. She grew up in Ireland, as you will hear as soon as she speaks, You'll hear her beautiful accent, and she's steeped in Celtic spirituality. She experiences divinity most profoundly in wilderness and in relationships. She currently lives in the Bay Area. So Naomi, turning it over to you. Thanks.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate that, Hunt. I feel like you covered it all, and then maybe it would be helpful for folks to know that I came into this work through congregational work, just noticing how many folks struggling with trauma and other mental health challenges often could not receive the support they needed for the healing that they so desperately sought. And I do believe that psychedelics open opportunities for that, and believe that we clergy have a role in helping them access it and supporting them and encouraging them to do that. Thanks.
Oh, Hunt, you're muted.
Thanks. I apologize if you're out there in Zoom land and I'm kind of going in and out. We do have a backup if the signal gets too weak. Tim King, my colleague, will take over. But for right now, I think we're doing okay. And maybe Naomi, just to start, if you could give, based on your training, both as a clergy person and then the additional training that you've gotten, see kind of where you think the important intersections are with spirituality and religion, and perhaps Christianity, just specifically.
Yes, absolutely. So I am working toward board certification as a chaplain, and I believe that clinical training intersects very beautifully with postgraduate work in psychedelic assisted therapies and research. And it does allow for working with specifically religious trauma, but also any mental or emotional or spiritual aspect of self that just needs more exploration and work and more integration as we mature as people. And I feel like we clergy have something to offer that traditional therapists perhaps are not yet fully able to do in ways that we can.
And I've said the practice or the discipline of spiritual direction, and how those, which is in some ways a different set of gifts than what those of us in parish ministry necessarily have, or at least use very often, and spiritual directors and the role of spiritual directors in this work. Yeah, and I'm wondering your thoughts about that, or how you think that might be intersecting as well.
Around spiritual direction specifically, Hunt?
Yeah, just around spiritual direction as a discipline, and as how that might be different, and how that might be different than the typical set of gifts and skills that people that have the parish clergy who are running a congregation or running a church would have, and how spiritual direction would intersect with psychedelics in the religious setting.
Yeah, I feel like spiritual directors, in my experience, I feel like spiritual directors are very able to help folks integrate mystical experiences, which I feel are more common than we often notice, because sometimes we're a little hesitant to name something mystical because it's kind of loaded. But spiritual directors absolutely help us notice when the divine is present, help us integrate those moments. And, as a profession that supports our spiritual development, I feel like this intersects beautifully with psychedelics.
Right. And then Celtic spirituality, because that you got that naturally. A lot of us read about it and then try to adapt that. But your own upbringing and where you grew up, and I'm sort of magical, and I'm wondering what parts of your own understanding of your own spirituality comes into contact with psychedelics or intersects with psychedelics.
Yeah. So I grew up, I'm sort of an intuitive and natural panentheist. So I experience the divine in all things and all people at all times. And Celtic spirituality is very rooted in that. So, and also the landscape, a pilgrimage going to visit a holy well at a particular season to venerate both ancient gods and contemporary saints. And so the stories, the narrative, the embodiedness, the moving through time and space, the recognition of the divine, and having tea with someone. And I feel like psychedelic experience grounds us and roots us in our life as it is. Certainly it has transcendental aspects, but the purpose, I feel, is to help us live more richly in the moment. And Celtic spirituality allows for that too.
Okay, good. And then what about the more academic? I mean, there's not been a whole lot. There are some theologians actually writing. Ron Colturn, I think, is on the call. So he's one of the people that's writing right now and thinking theologically as a trained theologian and as a teacher of theology, and spent his career as a theologian. Are you encountering sort of in an academic setting or a more theological? What are you encountering or reading or thinking about in that realm?
Yeah, so I've been really blessed. JT is also in that conversation circle of clergy who are doing the theological reflection, and Ron is fantastic and really bringing this kind of work to the fore and making it academically, validating it in an academic way. And with clergy, so following retreats where clergy do the integration or in conversation with folks like Ron, it's very clear that what people are bringing from the experience is theologically rich. So whether it's the experience of God that a person has and then lives into day to day, how it affects relationship, how that presence expands and opens us, keeps us curious and open-hearted, open-minded. And then how that trickles into everything we do, our work. So from a practical theological perspective, this is so important to the ministry that we enact in the world. And theologically, of course, conceptually, I think there's so much ground to be broken, right. And it's still unfolding.
And we're just getting started. I mean, the scientific research has been going on the scientists have been writing and thinking, at least in this latest round, 20 years, at least. And then before that, there was at least 20 years of research until the early 70s. So in the scientific and medical community, the thinking, the writing's been going on. But in some ways, we're just now starting the Christian and Jewish and Muslim, actually, too, thinking and writing. So it's kind of a new frontier in that. And in a way, it's a new frontier. It's a different way to, and maybe as we get to the question and answer, maybe some of the theologians on the call would like to pipe in and let us, and ask a question or have some thoughts about that. But we're just beginning that conversation, and we're just beginning the Christian conversation in a way. I mean, that's what's so exciting about it. Based on your training that you've had and the way you've been thinking and working on this, are there some lessons that you've learned already that you'd like to share with the group that's gathered?
Sure. So I'm open to approaching this anyway. Happy to do it in this format. Also happy to do the 7 minutes and then switch over to JT. How would you like to best approach that?
Do that. Do that.
I'm open to.
Okay.
Yeah. However feels best and however the flow works. Yeah.
Do that.
Related to what you just said, the medicalization of mystical experience is something that I feel like we clergy, it's worth paying attention to. And so one of the reasons why I am engaged in this work is to bring the religious and spiritual perspective, so that mystical experience doesn't become something that is purely medical and scientific. Yeah. So just some of the things, some of those lessons learned, like some of the context, people are already experimenting with psychedelics, already having mystical experiences. And as Ron has pointed out in his paper, clergy and chaplains are uniquely situated to help us understand and make spiritual and theological meaning from these psychedelically facilitated experiences. And therefore, I feel like we are all called into this work on some level to help prepare people for what they might encounter in this experimenting, which will only become more common as states legalize psychedelics. Some of the things that we've learned, from the retreat, like in Amsterdam, that makes these experiences possible, was to not set up a hierarchy of experience. So to prepare for the full complexity. So we all have encountered people, those of us in the work, folks who have the dark night of the soul, and that's the first thing of the divine ego is really important. Ego dissolution as the peak experience, and not everybody has it, so folks can feel left out when that doesn't happen. And so preparing people for the fact that even if full ego dissolution doesn't occur, people still have profound experiences that they can then integrate. And one of the clergy who participated in one of these retreats, said after one of their experiences, I feel more free to say what I want than what I'm supposed to say. I'm being more fully myself and with others in my sphere. And that the relationships may shift and change, but I feel liberated to be more truthful. So this theme of being more fully one's true self, and how then the divine expands our true selves and then brings us more fully into the world. It's really a beautiful thing. And one of the things that we've noticed in this work is how psychedelic experiences transcend a particular religious tradition and transcend language. Like there's no limit to the variety of experiences that individuals have. And there's no limit to the theological language or the metaphors that we can use to integrate them. So these experiences, they totally expand, what we can bring in and how we can imagine and embody and think about our relationship with the divine. And because of that variety, something that we've noticed is then what makes a retreat Christian. And I think there are two ways that we can really notice that and prepare for it. One is the setting. So bringing in our theological frameworks to prepare the setting with prayer, with anointing, and then with integration, how we integrate. And one of my clergy colleagues reflected on how the act of anointing before a journey, with scented oil, that scent, when it's revisited during the journey, helps to ground. So he used words like it provides a sensory reminder of God's presence and consecrates the experience, which then becomes dedicated to the divine and supports that sense of surrender, that even if you encounter the mysterium tremendum, that which is too much, or that which is the dark night of the soul, that the presence of God is there and is offering that presence and cultivating that trust. So I feel like Christian setting brings that as a setting that is not present in a clinical environment. And that's unique to a Christian setting. And with then the integration, okay, so we're integrating, we're clergy, we've had this experience. What does it mean? How do we make sense of it in our bodies, in our conceptual integration? And there's so many ways, just asking questions about where was God? How did you experience the divine? What does this mean for your prayer life? All examples of integration. But then also reflecting on themes that come up for people, like this numinous quality to every moment of life, or gnosis, direct experience of divine presence that fills us and compels us into living more fully. Another very common one was this notion that our head theology, that which we think, our beliefs, gets out of sync with our embodied, sense of the divine. And that's come up so many times, like, how do we bring those into sync with each other? And that is absolutely where spiritual directors, where clergy can help in ways that, again, therapists may not be trained to do, to really help folks integrate that. And then just in terms of where is this taking us? It's happening. The train has left the station. We're clergy. We're playing catch up. Okay, so what does it mean? Well, it means so many things. Some psychedelics are more suited to some people's needs than others. Psilocybin may not always be the right one to start with, which is the one most commonly used right now in retreat settings, especially for spiritual retreat settings. A person with a history of trauma, MDMA, also known as ecstasy, may be the place to start, and they may need specialized care first before attempting something like this. So just to be aware of that through being educated around what is in the research and the literature, that some people may need direction in one way or another before starting a retreat. Most of us, I'm sure most of us here have reflected on this already, but also know that psychedelics aren't a magic bullet. They do help us. There's clear evidence that they help some of us achieve, a sense of being more whole, or more connected and more mature, but that's not always the case. And we're still faced with being human. There's the sense that, maybe psychedelics will help us save the world or create a utopia. And my own personal belief in that is that that's unlikely. Again, this is my belief. I believe that we'll always be human. We'll always have our challenges. I theologically prefer to love the world the way exactly it is already, that it's whole and complete, while doing a little good along the way. And then just to remember that life itself is messy. This is a new field. It too will be messy sometimes. And then recognizing our own humanness, like I know that as a human, I won't always get things right. I will make mistakes. I will learn from those mistakes. And then, out of that messiness, hope to continue to contribute to what goodness can come from this field. And again, I think clergy trained in grace can help to inject that sense and that framework into this work. And that, again, that's a valuable contribution that we have. So those were my thoughts on where we've been and where we've come from. And I pass it back to Hunt and to JT.
Oh, thanks so much, Naomi. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. Really.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I think all of us as human beings bring our own life experiences, our own background into everything we do. And that's certainly the case for religious leaders. And certainly, and moving into this space, we're all going to bring our many gifts and our experiences and our own vision for this into it. And I think the more we're all in a relationship and learning from each other, maybe especially learning from each other, the better this is going to go, and the more healing and the more the bigger gift it'll be. And the collegiality of this as religious leaders and also just religious people as we move along. This is not as we're moving forward into this is not just for clergy or chaplains or spiritual directors, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the things we do need to really have in place as soon as we can are leaders who have the experience, so that the gifts that we bring to this already as chaplains or spiritual directors or clergy can be integrated into our own experience of psychedelics, so that we're able to lead other people. So I always wanted to make sure that it doesn't feel exclusive. This is not clericalism. It's just getting leaders prepared to be able to do what we do anyway. So with that, I want to introduce JT Smindorf, who's become a good friend and colleague over the last year. He lives in the Boulder area. He's ordained in the United Church of Christ as well as Naomi is. He's been at it about 20 years and brings both his previous work experience, as all of us do, and then his 20 years as a clergy person and leader of congregations and teacher and preacher and spiritual guide into his work. And he went to the Isle School of Theology in Denver, and also has this training that Naomi has from the CIIS in San Francisco. So JT, say a little bit more about yourself that's pertinent to this conversation, and then, as Naomi did, give us some of your thoughts about where we are right now.
Sure. Thank you, Hunt. Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's nice to see some familiar names here and familiar faces. That's great. I've been with you before and hope to be in conversation with you. And greetings to all those that I haven't met yet. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to be able to be having this conversation, a conversation that for me was incredibly unlikely just some years ago, not too many years ago. But this has been unfolding for me for several years. And so now I feel deeply invested in this conversation and in a good form of emergence relative to these ways of praying. That's how I relate to it. These are ways of praying, as well as, of course, in the studies through the California Institute of Integral Studies, the certificate in psychedelic therapies and research, seeing the powerful ways that it meets people. I suppose you could call it more medical, but for me, the medical and the spiritual, the psychological, they're pretty tight and they're pretty overlaid. There's a lot of shared territory there. And so being able to witness in video form, as was Naomi, the incredible healing that came to people in that case, from trauma, from PTSD. We were working with a lot of those videos were military veterans who had gone through combat or during the course of their military service had endured some other form of trauma. And just as a footnote, with most of those cases, there was already a beginning, an accumulating trauma from childhood, that which they experienced in the military sort of put them over the top. And that was part of the wonderful discovery that was made as they were in this psychedelic assisted therapy, that there was more than just a particular index trauma. There was a lifetime, and they were able to work through that because the medicine allowed them to stay with that without being re-triggered. And so I've seen that also in the work and being with people in this medicine space. So I think I'll just name a few things. Naomi really laid it out well. I want to echo her point about the potential range of experiences. Some of you are already aware, but some may be still in the early parts of this conversation, that there isn't, I love that phrasing, there isn't a limit to the number of experiences people can have. Certainly there's something dependent on which prayer we might say, or which plant or substance one is using as a help. And yet there's overlap there and an incredible range of experiences. So it can be bliss, it can be ego dissolution, but it also can be something difficult, something that can even include boredom. I've sat with people before who are kind of bored, and I've been around the shamanic viewpoint, especially my wife is trained shamanically. And so we just kind of hold that whatever is showing up for the person is their medicine. In a shamanic way, they understand that the plants have an intelligence and they are actually guiding something. If you're in a more psychological framework, you might agree with the MDMA research, where there's this sense of an inner healer, and the MDMA helps that person to tune in to that inner healer. It knows what's needed. And that could even include something like boredom, which in recent conversations been exploring that the boredom can be related to dissociation. There are just possibilities there. And we encourage people who are journeying in this way to just accept what comes and then use that as a departing point for their reflection and for what it might mean for them when you get into integration. So it's not just the wondrous and the rapturous, and that wondrous and rapturous certainly doesn't come in one form. Relative to Christianity, and I've been doing some of this interpretive work in the congregation in which I serve right now, and certainly want to do it for others who identify as Christian, is just to name that this is a liminal space experience of non-ordinary consciousness, and liminal space experiences are nothing new in religion and spirituality. It can be evoked through lots of means. Prayer and meditation, ritual and symbol and music are meant to try to draw us toward a non-ordinary state. Even if it gets to be ho-hum on a Sunday morning, at least to keep recognizing, well, we are coming and gathering and being in this particular space as an attempt. Even if our attempt isn't working or we're not tuning into that form, that vehicle, that's what we're trying to do, is get into a different kind of space. Even some of the orders of the day, if you're in a more liturgical tradition where you pray certain times of the day, those times of the day, remember, are meant to be liminal space helpers: dawn, dusk, being deep in the night. And we can see from scripture, certainly there are clearly times of liminal space where there's inspiration during non-ordinary consciousness. Ezekiel's vision, Moses and the burning bush, even the transfiguration of Jesus is certainly a non-ordinary space moment. And psychedelics, which can be brought into English as soul manifesting, is another form of that liminal space. And so the art is trying to be with liminal space, and how can it be part, for me at least, of a larger economy of spiritual life. And to be part of that economy, at least in my judgment, and I think others, integration is absolutely essential. As we've talked about in some other places, the Gospels aren't just the story of Jesus continuously at the mountaintop, like in the Transfiguration. You know, we just stay here and that's what it's all about. Let's stay up on the mountain forever. But instead, integration is the time outside of that medicine space and asking questions of, where is God in all of this? What is this asking of me? How do I live this out? And what are some steps of expression and practice where I can nurture what's come during the medicine time and bring it into my daily, weekly, monthly, annual way of being? Each trip around the sun, how am I continuing to live out what was given? And that pace and that path of integration, that's another principle I want to name, can vary greatly. Timing, and what layer one is focusing on. So I'm still, this is a way that I pray occasionally, and I'm still living out, unfolding aspects of experiences from, years before. And that can happen on a psychological level, can involve things about family of origin. It could be at a spiritual level of understanding one's place in the great network of things, one's intimate connection with those things. It can even play out in terms of physical symptoms. We see that in medicine journeys. People might have a discomfort or something happening in a particular area of the body. And it might also play out that way, or in those places where the physical and the psychological are dancing together, like Hunt mentioned, a journey where his anxiety disappeared, Yeah. And in the integration process, it might take some time for Christian language related to the experience to emerge. Because of course, the experience may not come in a recognized Christian way. That can happen. It's happened to me, but it may not happen. And I encourage those who identify as Christian to not be in a hurry. Not be in a hurry to make it all conventionally Christian, to fit into those recognized categories. So I encourage folks to just allow for integration to unfold over time and keep reflecting, so that a faith lesson might emerge, but it might not be explicitly in that experience. It might take time to find language to name what's coming. And it might be something you realize much, much later with time. And that's what I've seen, helping people talk about these. I've had people come to me who've said they've had these experiences and they want to just talk about them. And I've helped people through these experiences, and the integration is really pretty important. So that's what I would share right now, Hunt, just as an opening.
Great. Thanks, JT. Oh, there's so much in both of what you all said. And I mean, so much. And as you were talking, JT, just thinking about scripture and all the places where what I think we would call mystical experiences, whether it's Ezekiel or Moses in the burning bush. I think about the disciples and their experiences, the resurrection appearances of Jesus in scripture, the sense that it wasn't a normal encounter with Jesus. They had encounters with Jesus before he was crucified, and these encounters were much different, and almost as if they were in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. I'm not suggesting at all that they're using psychedelic, but they're in this place after their friend and teacher has been crucified, and they're in this very open space, and they come into contact with him in a very non-ordinary way. And to put psychedelics in this context of mystical experiences, whether there's a Christian kind of connection or not, this big understanding of mystical experiences and non-ordinary states of consciousness, and that psychedelics can open us up to those in a way that in our busy, in the way we're almost overwhelmed now, that it might just be that for some of us, it's going to take this intervention with psychedelics to open us up to all the mystery and all that's going on around us all the time that we're sort of closed off to. So as religious leaders and clergy, as we talk about this, I think it's important to ground it in and connect it to this much bigger experience of mysticism that's all over the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition, and all over scripture, I think. So it's not outside the realm of religion already. And because of the way we've talked about this for the last 50 years or so, it is jarring to people sometimes for psychedelics and Christianity to be put in the same sentence. But I think if we step back from it a minute and look at scripture and look at the mystics, Paul on the road to Damascus, it's all over it. And weird, strange experiences that become part of our own spiritual journeys. And I think for myself, it was a series of mystical experiences that led me to finally answer a call to ordination. So yeah, these are not, psychedelics is not bringing something that's not already there. It's just, I think, opening us to that. Any of you have, before I do have a couple questions I want to ask, but I'm wondering if that just kind of grounding psychedelics in the mystical tradition of Christianity, if either of you have any additional thoughts about that for those that are gathered. Naomi, is anything come up for you around that?
Yeah, very much so. So I can speak from my personal experience and why I'm passionate about this and why it brings tears to my eyes. And that's because, as someone who has had mystical experiences periodically in my life, and who then encountered an environment that was resistant to allowing my expression of those experiences to be validated, or to, that those, at different points in my life were dismissed as, some figment of my imagination, or, however, just a lot of resistance. And even in my clergy role, the UCC is a very intellectual Protestant denomination. And so in some cases, even praying is a little bit out there, some acts of, being engaged in the community, acts of, we got that so good, we're so, but, allowing the divine to be that in which we swim, in which we breathe, in which we are rooted all the time, can seem a little out there. And so for me, this field is an incredible relief, because suddenly mystical experience is, one, scientifically validated. We can describe it, we can measure it. It has healing qualities that are measurable. We're finding ways to talk about it again. And finally, religion is catching up again with that which, gave us life to begin with. So I think that's where I come from in this. It's such a relief that we are, again, allowed to talk about this in normative ways.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, ditto that. And one of the things I was listening to Michael Pollan the other day, many people know his book, How to Change Your Mind, the Netflix series and all. But when he was on a podcast, this one was the On Being podcast, he mentioned something that I see so often and have experienced, that in that mystical space, the insights that people get can sound banal. In other words, it's difficult to always be able to talk about it with someone else. As he said, it's like talking about your dream. Someone else is really not going to get it. Like they weren't there. But inside of the experience, as Naomi mentioned, there can be this tremendous sense of knowing. It's that noetic sense that's talked about, something. And so instead of being mundane, like on a bumper sticker, or routine on Sunday morning, that, we're just, we talk, Jesus is a good dude, and, love is really important. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for saying that. The mystical experience takes us back into a felt sense, a deep sense. Could be new for someone, but it could be a reminder. And I know for me, it usually shakes me out of could be complacency or just routine or just drift. And it gets me back to, that's right, that is really true, isn't it? And it really makes a difference. And I can feel that in my body. And it helps me to live into it again.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions. There was one question in the chat that I want to just quickly touch on, which is this question of spiritual directors. And the question is that, how's that connected to clergy? And I would say some clergy are spiritual directors, but not all spiritual directors are clergy. Because another way to think about a spiritual director is a spiritual friend or spiritual guide, which clergy are in a communal setting, but this is definitely, spiritual direction is definitely more one-on-one, at small group. And I've been in spiritual direction for 20 years myself. And over those 20 years, my spiritual directors have helped me make meaning of both big mystical experiences and difficult experiences, helping me think spiritually and theologically because they know me and we've had a relationship, sort of like we do with a therapist, but this again is around the spiritual realm and not so much the psychological. And there are training programs, there's certificate training programs, maybe even some master's programs, but there's institutes and institutions around the country and around the world who train lay people to be spiritual directors. And some of the best spiritual directors I've had have been lay people who sense a call, have the gifts and sense a call, and it gets affirmed. Spiritual Directors International is one organization where you can go to learn more about that if you're interested in it. But I think going forward, spiritual directors are going to be a really important part of how non-clinical, non-psychological meaning making happens, and preparation. I think spiritual directors are key to this. So just to clarify that, and I wish we talked about spiritual direction more in the church, because it's been for me personally, been so helpful, and for people that I've referred to. So happy to talk more about that or provide more information, but Spiritual Directors International will be one place to go to learn more. And there are institutes around the country and around the world that train people for that. So before we go to questions, for each of you, because of the training you've had already from a CIIS, I'm wondering what you think about what we need to do to keep people safe in a non-clinical setting, say for next year when we're possibly able to do this in Oregon. What are some things that we really need to keep in mind to keep people safe? And maybe Naomi, turn to you first for that, and then JT, just from your own training and experience, what you think we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, the first that of course comes to mind is trauma, because as in my own learning, it's been really noticeable how even when we're prepared, even when people are aware of the trauma that they carry and can articulate it, then there is also the traumas that we don't even know that we're aware of that psychedelic experience can bring to the fore. So just the whole, acknowledging that, naming it, preparing people that may happen, and then having, some sense of, okay, if this happens, then here are the responses that we're prepared to offer. What other responses would be helpful to you? And then ensuring that needs can be met as best as possible. That was one. What was physical safety, of course, always really important. I did notice, and JT may speak to this as well, some people in these settings really just need to be outside. and their visceral knowing of that is like so compelling. And I personally feel is a need that needs to be met. So creating safe environments for that to be possible within the limits and constraints of a retreat setting, I think is really essential. Again, this is my personal preference in how this could be. Making sure that people's support networks are in place, making sure that they have people that if people need to be referred for additional support, that we have those supports in place if they're not already. Talking with people to ensure that they're prepared to reach out for that. Someone who wants to do a retreat but is resistant to seeking additional support, maybe someone who's not a great candidate for something like this, just for everybody's safety. So I would say that those are the big ones for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really well spoken, Naomi. So we're always screening people for psychological, like ego stability, people who are already having trouble staying tuned in and might have some diagnoses. This is probably not indicated for them. If they've had psychotic breaks, bipolar, any major diagnosis, this is not helpful to them generally. So there's that. And the trauma piece is great to keep in mind. I think in the phase 2 MDMA studies, one of the things that predicted whether someone's CAP score would really come down and stay down was their support network. So that the treatment was helpful for just about everybody, and certainly a large number kept that for a period of time. But for those whom there were relapses and other complications, it often correlated with they were still going through something in their life situation was just not stable. Yeah, so I like everything you've said, Naomi. It really does capture quite a bit. I mean, you go back to that basic old phrase, set and setting, and try to account for that on lots of layers. And it's another reason to go back to preparation. Does the person really know what's coming as much as that can be? And do you really know that person enough? And if it's a group setting, is the group comfortable with each other enough? All those add to the safe enoughness. It's really helpful that this way of praying often helps those with trauma in terms of their response, so that amygdala can be calmed down. And we've seen it numerous times, people being able to deal with something that otherwise they couldn't. But as Naomi was saying, more needs to happen after the medicine journey. And what's the network then? It's not going to magically just go away, but it may help a great deal. So those are the kinds of things. Preparation is important.
Great. Yeah. Yes. Okay, good. Well, we've got about, thanks to both of you for that. Got about 20 minutes. So we've got a few people raise hands. I'm gonna turn it over to them for the questions. And if you would if you feel comfortable, introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling in from if you're comfortable, but if not, that's fine too. And then either direct the question specifically at one of the panelists or just in general, and we can take it from there. Start. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Yaya Gravel. I live in Soap Lake, Washington, and super happy to be here with all of you. I am not a religious leader. I've been involved in church leadership in the past, but I'm kind of in the trenches right now, and I seem to be working with people who are Christians. I've had my own amazing experience, but my question and comment is, first of all, I love that you're sharing so much about the integration, because for a Christian, it's not easy to find. It's not, the people that I integrate with, they don't know what to do with some of the things that I've experienced. They don't know how to help me connect the dots. So it's really, I'm glad you're talking about that. And I'd love to see a Christian integration circle on Meetup or something like that. That would be amazing. But my question is, it's kind of twofold. One, how can the layperson support religious leaders in this process as we move to doing ceremonies for people who identify as Christians or Christian mystics? How can I as a person support you? And also, how does a layperson who feels, I've never used this word in my life, called, how do I get involved, support, come alongside? I'm not looking for any kind of financial gain. I just would love to be part of other people's having their experiences and supporting them and supporting religious leaders. So kind of a long question, but anybody can answer that.
Good. JT or Naomi, feel free to, either one of you.
Well, I would say, I'll jump in. I would say that this process of trying to experiment with these formats and how to do this well is underway. Both Naomi and I and Hunt were at a retreat in Amsterdam where we had Christians in a retreat setting. And part of that retreat setting was a psilocybin journey. So that prospecting is underway. I, as do I'm sure a few others, but I already offer psychedelic integration. So people can get me on Zoom and we can have sessions, and we could certainly create group sessions if that, and you notice in the chat, Todd Minturn is named that. So there are people out there who understand this world enough to bridge it. They understand psychedelic journeys and Christianity and can be in that conversation with you or others.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, JT. Naomi, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just appreciation. So thank you, Yaya, for speaking up. It makes me as a clergy person delighted that there are folks like you in the world who are excited, already talking, already clearly just because of who you are and how you show up in the world, helping to educate people around this. So you are already doing a massive service to helping people learn and grow. And I think that's awesome.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, I always want to be careful about clericalism, and I've mentioned it earlier, but the ministry of the baptized is the most important order of ministry in the church. And the work of the clergy are to support the ministry of the baptized. I truly believe that. The churches throughout history has gotten that upside down in a lot of ways, and I think we're all called, Yaya, to the work in the world. I think especially lay people are called to vocations of service and ministry. So we've, our language, sometimes we say the ordained people are ministers, but I think all of us are ministers of the gospel. I know we are. We're all ministers of the gospel. And some of us are called for special roles and special training, but the work of the church is the work of all of us. And I think this intersection of psychedelics and Christianity is going to be a place for all of us. I can imagine retreats where there's staff of people that come and offer their time for a week because they had such an important experience. They're there to support the therapists and the spiritual directors, the people that are trained to lead, but to support them in a whole variety of ways so that people can have these experiences affordably and safely and in a very Christian setting. I think we're so well positioned for it. And I'm overly anxious. I want to start now, and it's against the law. So we're, in the US, it's against the law, but that's changing very quickly. So there are going to be opportunities for all of us, I think, to serve in this that feel called to it. And one of the works of Ligare is to develop resources and lists of, I am about to start really getting busy with a group of spiritual directors to start thinking about what resources they need to support people. So this is all happening right now. And some of those people are on this call. So it's emerging right now. And for Yaya, for us to hear from you what you need is a big benefit of these gatherings. So thank you. Thank you for that. James.
Hello, James Lindbergh, clergy person, Congregational ministry in Omaha, Nebraska. Quick question for you, JT and Naomi. And again, I'm just asking for an estimation, obviously hard numbers or anything, but in your estimation, what percentage of people do you perhaps talk to and screen, and then you just decide, you know what, I don't think I can work with you when it comes to your work with individuals and psychedelics? So that'd be one question. What percentage of people do you just say, you know, this is not for you, and I just need to kind of maybe send you on down the line? And then a follow-on question would be, have you ever had an experience where maybe someone was not screened out, and then you worked with them, and then maybe it became a problem or an issue, or there's some things that arose later on that maybe caused you some problems? So again, not looking for hard numbers, but just in your estimation, in those situations.
The number is small that gets screened out, and that may be from self-selection. People don't seek these out, that they have some sense of knowing for themselves. That's been my experience. But we definitely are looking at any medication issues. So there is that part of people needing to discontinue certain meds they might be on for a period of time if they're seeking a psychedelic prayer. There'll be more known about this in the research in the years to come, but right now there are just some basic precautions to say we really don't want to mix those two. So that does show up. It doesn't weed them out, but it does set conditions. And just on the other, I think I've had one experience where someone, I think, had an encounter in their journey that turned out to be a bit much for their ego. And their response to that was really just walking away from integration. And what I assume was just going back to their old life and realizing I can't live into that. It was too much too fast for that person. So I think their counseling support network could have been stronger before their experience with medicine.
Naomi, anything to add to that about screening out or?
Yeah, I'm probably JT and I are in agreement on this. There are some folks that I have recommended do one-on-one psychedelic therapy first, and just to be upfront, you know, especially here in the Bay Area, there are a number of very skilled folks, trained therapists who are doing it underground. And for folks who are indeed, you know, desperately seeking healing, I am open to referring them on. And so there, I have encountered that. So folks who want to try a retreat, but who maybe aren't ready because due to trauma or other significant challenges, and who another path might be better. So certainly have encountered that. I think most of us in the field will have encounters with people occasionally, such as JT described, where people go into, despite the best prep we can do, go into the experience. The experience is still not what they were prepared for. And then how that integration happens, perhaps it will be years later that part of self can open up to doing that integration. And again, I don't know how JT imagines this, but the way that I was trained in this is that the divine is always casting up like waves on a seashore, opportunities for healing. And just because it doesn't open in one moment and one place and time, I personally believe that the waves will always be washing up, and that opportunity will open for that person at a later time. So that's how I approach that.
Excellent. Thank you. As the question was asked, and as you all were answering, I was thinking one of the things that I always did as a parish clergy is I had a referral list of therapists. And some people would come to me. I'm not trained as a therapist, and I'm actually not trained as a spiritual director. I can do a little spiritual direction with people, but that's just not my training or necessarily even my gifts necessarily. But I always had a list of therapists and spiritual directors that I would refer people to. Maybe after a couple of meetings, I would meet with people. And I think that same thing would apply in this. Is there are going to be people that need intense therapeutic intervention and care that we're frankly just not trained for, and we shouldn't, because there's a set of skills that are beyond what we're beyond what we're trained to do, and that's just an acknowledgement of all of us having many gifts. So the more those of us working in this space resist the Messiah complex, the better. Where there's people we can help and there are people we can't, and to be clear about that. And that'll be evolving as we move through this. But I think always all of us being clear that we need to have referrals for referral lists, need to refer people. So really important. All right, thanks you both. Thomas, invite you to pose a question. Thomas Child.
Hey, nice to meet everyone. I am a neuroscience student at Florida, at the University of Florida, and I'm interested kind of how psychedelics is gonna shift culture going forward. I kind of was setting up a battery of questions that I accidentally posted. And the first might be a little too ineffable to completely touch on, but how do you think using psychedelics has changed your relationship with faith?
I'll answer that really quickly and pass it along, because I do think that's really important for the theological thinking for us to think about. And I've said this jokingly, but to people when people have asked that question, but it really is true that the things that I talked about and taught as a priest in an Episcopal church was mostly theoretical in a way. And in my experiences, those experiences I had where I had profound healing and a sense of the Holy Spirit, the things that I talked about, I realized were real. I now knew that when I prayed and laid hands on people, it was more than just being nice or doing some kind of old practice, that there was something mysterious and powerful happening in that. And I had the energetic sense, I had this very energetic field in my body. And I understood Paul's words that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. I got it. I knew it. It just wasn't some theoretical thing I said I believed. I got it. So that's how deep in my own sense of faith. It's not, I know it. It's not, I know it now. So that's my sense. And JT and Naomi, it'd be interesting to hear how you would respond to that.
Yeah, Naomi, go ahead.
Well, thanks, JT. I feel like my sense of the divine and my love of the divine and the work that I do. So I love spiritual accompaniment. I love watching people grow. And I love that quote that's often attributed to Origen, a theologian from the 2nd century, who said that the fullness of God is a human fully alive. You know, the glory of the divine is a human being fully alive. And for me, how this has impacted my faith and my practice is that I do see psychedelics as one of many tools, spiritually specific, that allow and expand our capacity to be fully alive. And my joy in this work is developing the tools and the expertise needed to facilitate that as much as humanly possible. And in that, I find and experience the divine most. So that's where I come to in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just echo that. This is about the experiential for me, and I can use all the help I can get of the many tools. I'll take anything. I'm no spiritual superstar, so if I get a tool like this that helps me get to the realness of something, I'll take it. And it's not something one can do on a daily basis. It's not daily practice, obviously, but it's periodic practice for me that gets me back to the well. It's like time to take a drink again, and whatever that is, and get real with it. Mm-hmm. So I hope it's one of several factors that helps bring in the age of the spirit, that we rediscover the experience.
And maybe kind of following up from that age of the spirit thing, how do you think that psychedelics are going to grow in their role within the church? And how do you think that might reshape or change the role of religion in contemporary society?
Who knows? And yeah, I hope.
One of you want to take that?
I couldn't hear you.
I think you can go ahead, JT. We're losing Hunt a little bit.
Okay. Well, I just hope it brings back a much broader pool of people who have had deep spiritual experience, and that just enlivens the community in general. These things are to be brought back to the community. If the old ways, which I believe they do have validity, you'd go out and have these experiences, but it wasn't just for you. You'd bring it back to the community, your vitality and whatever wisdom you gained. So I hope it enriches the whole community and gets people back into, oh, right, that's what it is. Oh, right, yes. Yeah. Naomi?
Yeah. So Thomas, what lights my fire in the church, I understand isn't what lights everybody's fire, but let me explain what I feel is lighting my fire right now. And that is, for example, when we were in Amsterdam, one of our colleagues is American, but has lived in Holland for now 30 years, a trained therapist and Jewish. And in his context in Amsterdam, he gathers a community of friends during times of Celtic festivals, so following the Celtic calendar, but he gathers them on Friday nights. They do a low dose of psychedelic, of psilocybin truffles together, not a full dose, and engage in ritual together. And so that is an example of a kind of informal house church led by a priesthood of all believers in a Jewish setting, but that is held and contained and facilitated in a glorious way that people are clearly desperately hungry for. So, I think that things like this will continue to emerge and will inevitably impact people's religious and spiritual sense of community. I do feel like in general, churches, including my own denomination, are still underprepared to face how these things will shape religious life. But I feel like we are doing our best to catch up and prepare for that.
Great, thank you all. Thanks for the question, Thomas. Two really good questions, and I think and good responses. So thank you. I want to turn it over to Doug now for his question. I think that'll be our last question. Doug?
Thanks, Hunt. My name is Doug Lynham. I'm a former Benedictine monk. And I just have a quick question for you all, which is, do you have any anecdotal or even empirical data, or even just a guesstimate on how often people's journeys go to the extremely difficult sphere? I mean, all journeys can have their difficulties, but where there's really unprocessed trauma or repressed trauma arises, is there the percentage of journeys that, or even just the percentage of journeys that are sort of light and dark? I mean, they all have a mix, but what percentage of those go really dark that in your experience, and how often is that something that's going to pop up and to be aware of?
Wow. My guess is that it's less than 10%, the really dark category. Probably 5%, maybe, but it's low. It gets much bigger when you include people having experiences that are difficult but worthwhile. So I've worked with one woman, my wife and I worked together in this way, and her journeys, typically, we've worked with her more than once, are very physical, a lot of thrashing, So after getting things physically safe for this person, we just let it roll. And she actually doesn't describe them as very dark in terms of her own unprocessed. She just does it that way, but might be processing grief in a transpersonal, transgenerational way. And it's named that and always comes out saying it was worthwhile. Very tired when she's done, but talks about it as worthwhile. That's a category that's bigger than the individual person's really dark, unprocessed stuff. That's what I've seen so far and the people that I've been around.
Naomi, thank you, Naomi.
I'm always very cautious with this, when we just don't have data. I feel like we will collect this data, especially as more retreats occur, as there's just more, as we're able to be more public about our findings, I think we'll get the data and be able to answer the question you just asked, Doug. If you have experience in this, you will know that folks may have 5 amazing journeys, and then the 6th one is where something happens. And I do have colleagues and friends who are experienced, and who then would describe their experiences as encountering like sort of demonic or very evil entities, and then how to deal with that. That's not necessarily, they don't experience it as their own suffering. So it is incredibly complex. And then how do we make meaning, or how do we interpret some of the things that we encounter? It is not always easy. And just knowing the challenges as we go in, but also knowing, I think faith is part of that. Always for me, if something is scary or overwhelming, our support network, grounding in love, just all of those practices, really cultivating that is, I think, again, something that being rooted in a community of faith allows us to address more holistically, perhaps than a purely secular or materialistic view. And that's just me.
Thanks. I'm really honoring our time. It's 1:15 in the East. So we're going to close out. I want a reminder, it was in the chat, for the next gathering. It'll be about ecstatic experiences in scripture. It'll be on the 31st of August, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. The link is in the chat now, and we will send that out in our every other week. I assume everyone's on that, but if you're not, just go to our website and sign up for that. And please forward those to colleagues and friends. We want, again, and this is not just for clergy or spiritual directors or chaplains, it's for all of us to have this learning. The goal is for us to be educating ourselves and each other about what's possible, so that we're ready when this is available to us legally. And it's coming. The FDA is approving it. It's going to be coming to Oregon as kind of a outside the regular process, kind of like cannabis was. It'll just begin to happen. And we want to be able to keep people safe. We want the container to be as safe as it possibly can. So we need to be educating ourselves. So that's one of the goals of this. So please sign up for our newsletters. Please spread the word. Please be in touch with us. And we're a small staff, but we'll respond as quickly as we can. And if you are looking for spiritual directors, email me directly, hunt@ligare.org. I have 3 or 4 or 5 names. I'm happy they've given me permission to share that. And I think our 2 guests would be also available for that. But just email me and I'll get back to you with a list of people that you could begin to talk to about that. And like you would look for a therapist, to look for a spiritual director in that same vein. Where I am right now, it's raining and it's noisy, and I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. But I want to thank our JT and Naomi for being here, Tim King for doing our tech, and for all of you for being present. And please be in touch and continue to check in with us. This recording will be available on our newsletter and on our website if you want to come back to it. So thanks, everyone. See you next month on the 31st. Bye-bye. Peace.
Thank you.
Peace.